but one of the things that we're thinking about here is there are job opportunities in the sustainable transportation space. There are job opportunities with bicycling and bicycle repair.
I'm Karen Whitaker with the League of American Bicyclists, and I'm here with John Talmadge, the Executive Director of Bike Durham. And Bike Durham was awarded the Advocacy Organization of the Year. So John, welcome and thank you, and congratulations.
Thanks, Karen. We're really pleased to have gotten that recognition from the League.
Can you start off by just telling us a little bit about Bike Durham and the changes over the last few years?
Yeah, the organization started in 2013 when some neighbors got together here in Durham, North Carolina, who were all riding their bikes around the city of Durham, in the central part of the city mostly, and were concerned about their own safety and the safety of other people who were riding their bikes, and decided to organize and create the organization. One of the founders had come from the Bay Area and had been active with the bicycling community in San Francisco. She was really probably the driver to formalize the organization. And it maintained its role as an all-volunteer organization from that initial period in 2013 up until I was hired in 2020. And we could talk a little bit more about it, but in that period of time, it also made a transition from an organization really focused on bicycle infrastructure to one that is more broadly focused on sustainable transportation in the city.
All right, great. And I know that Bike Durham does events in education and advocacy. What would you say have been some of the biggest accomplishments over the last year or so?
And I'll take those in reverse order. The advocacy front, some of the biggest wins have been at the regional level with our metropolitan planning organization, where we pushed them to adopt a goal in their long-range plan of Vision Zero, so 0 deaths and serious injuries, 0 carbon emissions, and 0 disparity of access based on race and income. And then, as the staff brought back the scenarios for how to what the 2050 plan should look like, we were able to work with the elected officials on the board and have them direct the staff to go back and start over with a set of projects that got much closer to that vision. And so they stripped out highway expansion projects and doubled down on investments in bicycle infrastructure, sidewalks, and transit. Locally, we've been able to work with the city very effectively, both on transit expansion and on pushing faster delivery of bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. The last one has still got a ways to go, but it looks like the city's budget this year is more focused on delivery and building the capacity of staff to deliver projects. Even the staff jokes, although with a tinge of sadness, that they're really good at planning projects, getting money for projects, and not so good at delivering the projects. And so there's a real focus of effort there. On the education front, the biggest success has been in gaining a contract with the city to deliver the Safe Routes to School programming in our school district. So that started in 2020, and we've delivered bicycle safety education programming and also organized the Safe Routes to School activities in May during Bike Month and in October during Walk to School Month. We've had 6 schools we were able to do the programming for 4th and 5th graders this year, and next year we have 13 schools that want the programming, so we're having to seek more money for the educators and get another fleet of bikes so that we can continue that work. And we went from 11 schools in the fall that participated in Bike and Walk to School to 19 schools this spring. It's coming close to 20,000 kids that participate in that across the school district. So that's been a real success, and a lot of praise from both the city that has the contract or has the grant from NCDOT, but also from the school district. It's been a great partnership. And on the events, I think the biggest success, which is probably common to a lot of organizations, was finding a way to pivot during the pandemic and figuring out how to offer some virtual programming and then transitioning to in-person rides. And I'm always pleased and surprised at the turnout we get for the rides we have, and it's a great way to build community and build people who are interested in our advocacy mission.
Yeah, that's great. It does. I feel like particularly after the pandemic, people really want to do things together, and being outside is a great way to do that. I wanted to go back to something you said about advocacy, because we see sort of a back and forth about what's more effective, sort of the policy approach or going project by project. And it sounds like by getting the MPO to change the goals, the projects followed. Did you feel like you had more pushback on changing the goals or then changing the projects?
That tension is here as well, and especially in sort of allocating my time and our volunteers' time. And we're trying to stay focused on the policy front because, one, there are so many different projects across the community that we don't have the wherewithal to be involved with all of them. We're in a community where it's a very progressive political leadership. The staff believes in this. And so what we've found is it's really the sustained voice of an advocacy organization to continue to push them to move out beyond the inertia of the way things have been done before. It's not like there's a desire necessarily to do things the way in the past, but everybody's busy, right? And everybody has more work than they can do. And so doing things differently really takes an outside pressure and outside force. And that's how we try and leverage our membership and the community that believes in the work that we're doing, and use my staff time and staff time of volunteers to push on, really push on the policies. But then in some cases, there are particular projects that we think can move the ball forward, and maybe there's some innovation, or we can get the city to do something a little bit differently that they've done before, whether it's parking protected bike lanes. In some cases, it's just protected bike lanes with flex posts, but getting them to move beyond the way they've done things in the past.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. But
it is a little bit of both. We want to be more focused on the policy, but because there's not a separate organization working on the projects, and actually, lots of volunteers, a lot of individuals who come to us care about a project, right? That is in a part of the city that they live in, or it's a street that they bike on, or walk on, or it's a transit project, that we try and be responsive to those issues, but figure out ways to leverage them into the bigger policy changes.
yeah, and I would hope that changing the goals of the plan, I feel like that's a really important nut to crack, because then you have the plan on your side.
That's right, yeah. And we can come back to, this is what you're setting as the goals. It doesn't look like this set of actions is living up to that. And one of the things that was rewarding and listening to the elected officials' conversation about these goals and what this plan could be is they also see it as a tool that can be used for advocacy, because the change doesn't all rest with them, right? There needs to be changes at the state level. There needs to be some changes at the federal level, although those seem to be moving a little bit faster than at the state level right now.
Yes.
So
It's helping them help you.
That's right.
Yeah. Something else you mentioned is that Bike Durham has switched from focusing on bike advocacy to sustainable transportation advocacy. Can you talk a little bit about why you made that change?
Yeah, it happened before my tenure here, but the leadership in the late teens, I think, had a recognition that the changes to our streets, the changes to our transportation, wouldn't be complete if they got the changes for safer bicycling. And that there's the opportunity to create a bigger coalition if we're also bringing in the communities that are concerned because they don't have sidewalks, or there are not safe crossings of streets, or the transit service isn't good enough, or the bus stops don't have shelters. And so the board went through a strategic planning process, exploring what other active transportation organizations were doing around the country, also diving into racial equity and what it would mean for this organization to be centering racial equity and educating themselves. And so came out of that process with a new vision and mission for the organization that broadened beyond the focus on safe biking. And it's what attracted me to the organization, frankly, that my background had been in transit for more than 2 decades. And while I was, would bike a lot for transportation in my own personal life, I had not come through that as my area of passion. And so finding an organization here that was bringing these issues together in a holistic way and centering racial equity was a great fit for what I was looking for.
Yeah, we've seen more and more groups sort of expand that way. But then there's the debate about changing the name. Did you guys think about changing Bike Durham? And what?
That is an ongoing discussion because no matter, like, when we have a conversation with anybody, we're introducing ourselves to a new organization, a new set of individuals. We start out with the broad mission of the organization, and still what they hear or see is, you're doing a great job on bicycle infrastructure, or I love the bicycle rides that you do. So we're still a small organization, and it takes a good deal of work over a period of time to go through a process of a name change like that. I mean, we've built up a lot of credibility with the name that we have, and there's recognition with the name that we have. We've been watching what the Atlanta Bicycle Coalition has been going through and their recent change. And that's been, one thing that I've really found in the role as executive director is the camaraderie and the network of executive directors of active transportation organizations, and the great work or service that Transportation Alternatives out of New York City provides to convene us on a regular basis. It's been really helpful to make connections there and learn what those other organizations are doing.
Yeah, and there's a feeling among bicyclists that the name bike sort of brings in a membership sometimes that the others don't. But I just wanted to ask, because we see other groups sort of debating that. But one thing related to that was that I know you have a movable event. Could you talk about that, how it got started and what it is and how it's evolved?
So Durham is known as the Bull City. There's a long history about that, and so lots of businesses are called Bull City Brewing, or all types of different names. And shortly after the organization was founded, the annual celebration event was Bikeable City. And so people would gather, there'd be bike rides, there'd be other fun activities for kids to adults. And when, I guess shortly after I came, I started the conversation about let's lean into our broader mission. And the first place was actually going to be in coalition with the city around their Earth Day Festival and doing a sustainable transportation expo. Well, this was 2020, and so we had gotten a lot of things in place to have bicycling activities, but also transit and scooters and walking. And then that was supposed to be May, or the end of April, and so that got canceled. And we had been talking about converting the Bikeable City to movable cities so that we could bring in the other types of sustainable transportation into the event. We've only been able to have it once because 2020 was canceled, so we did one in 2021. It was a fun event. We had engagement from the transit agency, and they brought an electric bus out. We, of course, had a lot of bicycling activities, did a walk around the neighborhood where we were. And we're thinking about how to continue to connect it to the rest of the work that we do, our advocacy work, our education work, and to continue to lean into the broader mission as we build that out. It's probably, I guess we think of it as our signature event. It's still not that big compared to what a lot of cities are able to put on. But that's the direction that we're going with that. It happens in the fall. It is also a good lead in to our end of year appeal and having people feel connected to the organization to support it.
Yeah, I think that's the benefit of working on biking is it's fun. Everyone sort of has that memory of biking at some point, at least, and that is fun. So you're finishing, well, you've been an executive director now for 2 years. During that time, what would you say that you're most proud of that Bike Durham has accomplished?
So we'll set aside the things that we've already mentioned. A lot of those I feel real proud of. I mean, one, I feel, before I get into what I'm proud of, I'm really grateful to the board that we have, and that going through this transition from a board that's doing everything to working out the relationship of responsibilities with an executive director. It's still, I mean, this is an ongoing conversation. How do we make this transition from a board that has to still do a lot of work, especially around events, to one that can always be more strategic and about governance, as opposed to having to do, put in hours on being at events and planning those events. I mean, I'm really proud of some of the institutional work that we've put in place so that the organization has been prepared to grow. So that was things as simple as we didn't really have policies around charitable gifts, and to be clear about what we wanted to pursue and what we didn't. We didn't really have a budget when we started. Just key to giving guidance and having agreement around what are our values, how are we going to spend the money that we have, and what are our goals for growing the organization. That's another area of pride is how much we've been able to grow the organization. So we've hired a director of development and communications. We've hired a manager for a Safe Routes to School program. We have 5 other part-time employees who are working on either Safe Routes to School or another outreach contract that we have with the city around e-bikes. And we've been able to get grants to hire contractors to do traffic calming work in a few different neighborhoods. And that has come with both the realization that there's other capacity building activities that need to happen around human resources issues, right? And getting those things in place, the drudgery around workers' comp insurance and when you have to get that, and unemployment insurance and things like that. But I hope that the goal had been, and we had a strategic planning process in my first year that said we want to be growing the staff in order to accomplish the goals that we had around the advocacy, education, and events, and didn't want to continue to rely on volunteers to do everything. And that requires you to put these other building blocks in place. And so we've been block by block building this organization. And we're in a good place. We're still, I would say, early days compared to where we want to be, but we're on a great trajectory.
I'm glad you brought up that organizational work, because I think we always like to talk about the public-facing programmatic work. How do you split your time between those two?
Yeah, it varies. I mean, we had a conversation about it when I was hired. Actually, I was hired as a half-time person. We've been able to make me a full-time person this year. But how much of my time should be on advocacy activities versus capacity building versus outreach and partnerships. And we established that 40% of my time should be on that organizational capacity building. It certainly is fluctuating from week to week and month to month, depending upon what's going on. But I think that that's probably a fair estimate of how much of my time is spent on organizational capacity building, especially if you consider fundraising a part of that, not only the relationships, but the building blocks, making sure that we have the back end pieces in place so that we make it easy for people to make contributions.
Yeah, I think it's an important piece to think about for organizations that may be a couple years behind Bike Durham, that are thinking about that first hire and how to do that. So, as we're getting sort of close to the end of this, I wanted to ask, what's next for Bike Durham? What are those goals of moving forward in your next year?
Yeah, a couple of the areas that are on our strategic plan list. So one is to be able to leverage the enthusiasm that we have in our Safe Routes to School program into that engaging parents and the students and the administration in the thinking about the changes that would need to happen to the streets around the school so that families would feel comfortable with their kids biking and walking to school. Right? So that's a challenge in a place like Durham that is mostly suburban because of the age, it's not that old a city, there's lots of new development. So being able to make that connection between the education activity we're doing and that advocacy and the changes to the streets. And then the second area I'm excited about, we just recently got a grant to work with 2 historically African-American neighborhoods in Durham and the leadership organizations in those 2 communities for a year-long effort to both promote biking, walking, and transit use, but also to do resident research into what are the obstacles to more biking, walking, and transit use, so that we can take that back and use that in the advocacy. Both of these neighborhoods have been real champions in doing a lot of this in recent years, but it's falling on a few people, and so we see this as an opportunity, and they see this as an opportunity to bring more people into the advocacy and the activity, and also to do a lot of it through events, so that people are having fun as part of this. And we'll do bike rides, we will do walks in the neighborhoods, we will engage one of our local museums. So I'm really looking forward to that work over the next year.
Yeah. And it sounds like you worked with community leaders to get that grant.
Yeah, we submitted as a partnership, and the reason that we are the fiscal agent for it really is because we had built the capacity, and so we've got sort of that organizational infrastructure to be able to handle the grant and hire the person, so that we can work with the other two organizations.
Yeah, it's a great example as we see more groups really trying to center equity. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
And so, final question, as you're moving towards those goals, what would you like to see from the bike movement as a whole or from the national organizations?
Yeah, so I think that this building the relationships with partners that either we've been working at recently as a movement, or in some cases we don't have those relationships. I mean, we're still at the early stages of building relationships with Black-led organizations or Latino-led organizations. And coming to the relationship as a sort of, this is a two-way street. We want to know what you're interested in, and to help you achieve your goals, as we are interested in these sustainable transportation related outcomes, and we want to invite you to be part of the work we're doing. And I think other partners that we're thinking about, that I know at the national level there are some of these partnerships with public health organizations, that or education, across different modes. So there's lots of potential partnerships that, when we're small organizations, it's hard to have relationships with everybody, right? You have to make decisions. But I would love to see the movement sort of broadened that way, so that it's embedded in these relationships. Other ones, are even include labor. That's more, I think it's stronger opportunities for that in northern cities where there might be stronger labor organizations. But one of the things that we're thinking about here is there are job opportunities in the sustainable transportation space. There are job opportunities with bicycling and bicycle repair. And so how can we bring that into schools as we're doing safe routes to school activities, so that people can see, it's not just fun or it's not just transportation, but there are also job connections to this. So looking for all of these different connections, partners, I think it's going to take that before we can really build the political force necessary to make the changes at our state level and some of the federal issues.
Yeah, so thanks for that. I would agree that building those partnerships can unlock a lot for the bike movement, the sustainable transportation movement. So thanks so much for your time. Really enjoyed learning from you about all these great things that Bike Durham is doing. And just want to, one last question. When you started, you had a half-person staff, and now you're 3 full-time employees?
Effectively 3 full-time employees, but also 5 other part-time employees.
Yeah, well, that's a great growth for a couple of years.
It's been incredible. It's been fast too.
It's been a busy couple of years. Yeah. So congratulations again on Advocacy Organization of the Year, and thank you for all the work you and Bike Durham have done.
Thank you, Karen, and thanks to the League for everything you do and the resources that you give us. It's been great to be welcomed into the community and be able to feel a part of it.